A few months ago, we kind of went back and picked up some of the early stories from the Old Testament. On Earth Day, we picked up the stories of creation, and after that, we followed Abraham and Sarah on a journey. We saw the different chapters of the story unfold. And today, we have the beginning of a new section in the Jewish history. We have the creation time. We have really the stories of Abraham and his descendants. Then we get to the time of the Judges. In there, I obviously just skipped the Exodus. So Abraham and the descendants, they end up in Egypt. They come out, they come into the Promised Land, and then the last 4 weeks we did the Judges. We ended that time with Samuel coming in and starting a new chapter. Samson was the last of the judges we read about, so we get two Sams back to back. Samson, who's not very good at this whole spirituality thing. And now the birth of Samuel, who will become the anointer of kings, who will become the one really to direct God's people's direction, which way they're going, to be a bridge between the people and God in the days to come. We get a birth story with it, which is kind of neat. The story today ends with the birth of Samuel and him being given to the Lord in service. But at the heart of the whole story is Hannah. Hannah is a mother-to-be who is troubled. She wants a child. She feels like she's supposed to have a child, and there's a competition going on. Back then, one marriage was not normal. Men had multiple wives, and the other wife was bearing children. Hannah was not. She felt less than, and she wanted a child more than anything. Whether it was her own heart's desire, whether it was feeling like she wasn't as good enough partner. Whatever her reason, she desperately desired a child. And she is in the temple, bearing her soul to God, begging to be a mother. Eli, the head priest, sees her and comes and says, "Listen, drunk lady, you're going to have to move along." We've seen this in our culture today, right? Someone's very distraught in public, and we assume they are either mentally ill or they are intoxicated, and it's probably time for them to move along so we all feel comfortable being in the space. Hannah assures Eli, the head priest, she's not drunk. There's nothing wrong with her as far as being intoxicated. She's not messed up in any way other than her own emotions. And she's pouring them out to God. Eli responds by saying, "May the Lord hear your prayer." It's as if he's caught off guard by her emotion. That the outpouring, the honesty, the vulnerability that she shares isn't something he sees every day in the temple. We might be able to relate today with how we often feel church being confining or restraining. Sometimes we hold our tongue. Sometimes we put our faith in a box to keep it safe for the right time. And Hannah's just letting it all pour out. Eli gives her a blessing and she goes home. She goes home, she lies with her husband, and they conceive a child. And true to her word, after the child is old enough to be away from her, after he's been weaned, she brings young Samuel to the temple and gives him to Eli. Now there's a piece in here that makes this even more impressive. Eli has children of his own. He's a father. He knows what it means to have a child. He's also a really bad father. Eli's children are known as the other priests who take advantage of their position, who eat the offerings that are brought in. They would be the minister's kids in eating communion before we've had a chance to even take it. They would be the ones skimming off the offering so that they could give offering to the church. These are Eli's kids. And this is who she gives her child to. Is it devotion? Is it crazy? Is it the cultural construct of the day that a person's authority outweighs common sense? However it comes to it, Hannah makes what in her mind is a faithful decision, following through on a vow she made. Hannah makes a decision based on her devotion to God. But it is a decision, let's be clear, not for herself, but for Samuel. Samuel is the one who is then to be raised as a Nazirite, one devoted to God, one who will not have wine or strong drink, or even raisins in that time and tradition. He's one who will not cut his hair. He will not trim the sides of his beard. He will live a devoted life to God. How many of you had a parent make a vow for you and you were thankful? How many of you had your parents decide something for you and it worked out just like they planned? How many of you had parents with visions for your future and you fulfilled them all? Happily. There's this word that teenagers learn. It's called resentment. Repeat after me. Resentment. It's a big word. Anybody heard this one before? I just spent a week at camp with those entering 9th and 10th grade. They had lots of stories of resentment. One of them for the fact that he was at camp. He was brought against his will. And I thought his behavior was uncomfortable. And then I saw a Facebook post on social media from another camp director asking, I don't know which of these crazy stories is worse. Is it the child dropped off against their will, who went on a hunger strike till we had to send them to the hospital, who then came back to camp and ran away till the police found them? Or the mother who dropped her child off asking, how violent can a child be before you all call the police? Or, I mean, it was amazing as I kept reading this camp director's summer stories. There were two more that followed upon it, and each one I read, I thought, oh my goodness, how did that child end up at camp? One was a child that was so nervous, they took all their anxiety pills on the way to camp. Had to be taken to the ER, have their stomach pumped, and then they were dropped at camp. The best one of all, though, was the mother who came early to pick up her child from camp because she had seen the pictures online and didn't know why her normal child was with all the others that she assumed were special needs. You can't make this stuff up. The way as parents we protect our children, the way some parents drop off their children, the expectations we have or the lack of expectations have a serious impact on the way young people engage the world. I want for you to imagine now that your parent or guardian has just decided you will spend your life without any alcohol. You will spend your life with the same hairstyle. They're picking your hairstyle for the rest of your life. They are choosing where you will live for the rest of your life. And unlike many parents that make that where you'll live choice, it's not with them. Samuel had to have had some issues growing up that started with a mother making decisions for him. But her decisions come out of faithfulness. They come out of faithfulness. They come out of a tradition that's very different than ours, a world that's very different than ours, culturally, structurally. But some of those emotions still have to be there. In the end, as parents, as guardians, as adults with children in our care, we cannot pray in their place. They eventually have to learn to pray. Our faith can't be held in their place. They eventually have to form their own faith. We can't express their spirituality for them. We can pray for them as children. We can pray with them as partners, as mentors. We can even empower their spiritual journey by dropping them off at places like church camp, even if they don't want to be there. We can bring them to worship. We can pray together as family. We can show them our devotion through our spiritual disciplines, our reading of Scripture. We can mentor the kids next door, showing them kindness and love. We can mentor the grandchildren, nieces, and nephews, showing them compassion and care, using God language that isn't judgmental, isn't cruel, and welcomes all people and affirms all people. But we can't make a decision for them. Not one that sticks. We can tell them, you're going to be this religion, but one day they will make a choice. We can tell them, you won't have any religion, but one day they will make a choice. We can say, we're going to show them everything and let them make up their mind equally. But even in doing so, we have taught them something that we value. And in the end, they will make their own choices. Instead, we need to make sure we are strong examples. We can't control how young people will be formed, but we can show them how God has formed us in the ways that we pray, in the ways that we personally are growing, in the ways that we are serving other people around us. We set an example, following the examples of our faith mentors. Think about those who had an impact on you. Did they drop you off at church and leave? Did anyone drop you off at the temple and say, good luck in there, say hi to the high priest when you see him? Tell him I sent you. More likely, the mentors in our faith sat with us. They tolerated us, even when we were really irritating. The mentors in our faith invited questions from us, and they shared vulnerably their own stories. They shared the prayers that they had poured out before the Lord, like Hannah, and what they had learned from their journey. How did your mentors impact you? How have those who have shaped your faith, how have they taught you? Did they choose your faith? No. So when did you choose your faith? What led you to that? Statistics tell us that all children need at least 5 adults that they do not consider their primary guardians. 5 adults who are mentors in their life, teachers, neighbors, pastors, church mentors, Sunday school teachers, the person who sits with them in church, the person who teaches them music, the person who coaches their sports, who sits with them when they're scared. Think about in your life, who shaped you to the person you are today? Did you resent it? Were you frustrated by it? Were you controlled by it? Sometimes the answer is yes, and we overcome. But most often, it is people who empowered us to be us. They served as great examples for us and then turned over the choices to us. Let us decide for ourselves. In our story today, Hannah has hopes for her child, just like every parent ever has, no matter how poorly they've gone about expressing it. Hannah has hopes for her child. Think about the hopes we often hear for our children today. They'll grow up to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or a part of the family business. They'll grow up to provide grandchildren because I'm ready for that. Hopefully they'll grow up and be something that makes enough money to take care of us too. That's every Gen X parent's prayer right there. We were told we were the most important thing in the world when we were young, and we still believe it. We're hoping our children remember it when we all get old. Hannah has a career path for her child, a faith path for her child. But it's a little more noble than sometimes we hope for our children. Hers isn't just wanting financial comfort or safety or stability. It's wanting her child to know God. It is a noble desire. But before this story can go further, Samuel and God have to find their own story. And we'll dive into that call story a little more next week. But we know as Hannah brings this child to God, the decision isn't made. The story is not set. There's nothing that happens here that assures Samuel will be a faithful leader. But a parent who is faithful, an adult role model who shows what faith and devotion looks like, it can't hurt. I spent this last week at camp with many kids who had wonderful spiritual role models, and others that didn't. Others who struggled to understand some of the basic concepts of community that we were describing, some of the basic understandings of respect that we were asking from them. And it was hard. One young man touched my heart. We had been playing a basketball game the first time he had done what everybody else was doing in days. He knew how to play a half-court basketball game by the same rules as everybody else, even if he couldn't figure out table manners and being quieter in worship to listen or sharing in a group conversation. On a basketball court, he was in his environment. And as we were playing, he started talking about the little pieces he had picked up along the way. And his natural environment, he was comfortable. And along the way, he looked at me and said, "I'm scared of Jesus." And I wanted to cry. I'm scared of Jesus. One day, I'm going to have to deal with that. And when you live where I live, you better be scared of Jesus, because nobody's getting it right. I realized what I had experienced from him had been minor. There had been minor inconveniences, minor disrespects to me and the community compared to where we've allowed this child to live, to the world we've allowed him to grow up in. Oh, if a parent would only have taken him and put him in a nice suburban church's narthex and said, "I hope the priest or pastor is a good person." Yet he was there because a family member loved him enough to drive into the heart of LA and pick him up. A family member had loved him enough to pay for his time at camp. Family members had come with him as campers, cousins like brothers. And as he acted a fool through the week, they loved him. They hung out with him. They didn't abandon him. I watched a family shaping each other's faith, but I also watched a young man by the end of the week shaping ours. Shaping ours. He never did quite figure out how to sit at a dinner table without disrupting others. He never did quite figure out how to sit for more than 5 minutes without irritating whoever was right next to him. But in the shower, the last night at camp, instead of singing whatever songs he had heard on the radio, instead of coming up with his own beat and his own rap, which he had done multiple times in the showers, he had put songs he had heard at camp to his own rhythm and was singing them as he showered. Along the way, he had found his relationship with God. It was not what he expected when he got dropped off at camp. And it probably wasn't what his family expected either. If they had seen how he behaved at camp, the aunt that brought him might have been mortified. But he was authentic to himself. He was true to himself. He wrestled out loud. He poured out his frustration, his angst, his anger, his disappointment was still sitting still. He was completely honest about who he was through the entire week. And somehow along the way, God shaped him. We can try to hand our children over to the church and expect them to do something magic for us. We can think that making decisions for our children on faith for them will make a difference. But in the end, they and God will be on their own journey. Us and God, we've been on our own journey. We may have been a mess along the way. We may have been the child whose parent continually dropped them off at church. We may be the child whose parent drugged them to work at church constantly. However we came into this journey, however we discovered it, whether it's the tradition we grew in or one we chose for ourselves, however we got to where we are, it has been a process with us and God. So how about us going forward? Are we ready to make the decisions of Hannah and try to shape the next generation? Are we ready? Are we ready to do what's necessary as Eli's in the world and take in the children around us, to mentor them, to care for them, to be examples for them? If we are, it begs the question of us. Are we ready to commit ourselves, to give ourselves to our faith, the way those who raised us hoped we would, to give ourselves to our faith, the ways our mentors hoped we one day might, to give ourselves to faith in a way that calls us to sort the world around us, filter the noise, filter the distractions, and give our hearts to God, so that we might be the example they need, that we might be the role models they deserve, so that even when a kid is dumped off at the curb of the church, they might look at us and say, I want some of what they've got, because that is beautiful. That looks like what I've dreamed of. That looks like family. That looks like love. That looks like the life I want and one day will choose. We can't choose it for them, but when we choose it for ourselves, we show the world what it looks like, and God is served. Amen.